Hey guys, tonight we step into the slow, sacred world of ancient Egyptian funerary rites, where the journey to the afterlife begins not with a flash, but with a careful, deliberate act and the cleansing of a lifeless body. Imagine yourself standing beside the embalmers by the banks of the Nile, feeling the humid air thick with incense smoke, hearing the soft lapping of water, and watching as the corpse is gently washed with sacred Nile water and palm wine. This isn't a quick splash or a hurried rinse. No, this is a ritual, a meticulous purification meant to honor the dead and prepare their soul for eternity. You probably won't survive this 70-day mummification marathon, but here you are, wide awake in the slow-motion moment where everything starts. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments. I want to know where you are as we wander through history together. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your first step in this long farewell is the cleansing ritual. The embalmers begin by washing the body carefully with water drawn from the Nile, which was believed not just to clean, but to purify and renew. They then rub the corpse with palm wine, a practice both practical and symbolic. Palm wine acted as an antiseptic of sorts, but also as a libation, a gift to the gods. The smell of fermented sugar mingles faintly with the dusty earth beneath your feet, blending life's sweetness with the inevitability of death. This initial cleansing isn't just about hygiene, it's about transition. By washing away the physical grime and, metaphorically, the residue of life, the body prepares to become something more, an eternal vessel for the K, the life force. Historians still argue whether these cleansing rituals were uniform across periods or varied by region and social status. But the slow, reverent washing remains a constant. You might imagine this as a simple bath, but it's more like a spiritual awakening for the dead. The embalmers chant quietly, invoking Mayat, the principle of order and truth, as they begin the transformation. And you can't help but notice the mix of solemnity and routine. This is the kind of slow, repeated task that could lull even the most awake into a dreamy state. Just remember, you've got many days ahead in this process, so stay tuned for the next step, a surprisingly icky but crucial part, where the brain is removed through the nose. Yes, through the nose. Please hold your curiosity. Now that the body is washed and purified, you trudge slowly alongside the embalmers toward one of the more infamous and frankly gruesome steps, the removal of the brain through the nasal cavity. Yes, it sounds like a nightmare medical procedure from a sci-fi movie, but this was ancient Egypt's standard practice. And it takes patience, precision, and a certain degree of morbid determination. Picture yourself standing over the supine corpse. The embalmers use a hooked instrument. It's often described as a long, thin metal rod, carefully inserted through the nostril and into the skull to pierce and liquefy the brain tissue. They then extract this mushy mass piece by piece, essentially sucking it out in a slow, meticulous fashion. Historians still argue whether this was done through the right or left nostril, or if different teams had their own favored approach. Regardless, this procedure wasn't quick. It could take hours, and you can almost feel the steady, repetitive rhythm of their movements. Now here's a quirky tidbit. Some scholars suggest that the Egyptians considered the brain to be useless, a mere filler, compared to the heart, which they saw as the seat of intelligence and emotion. That's why they went to such lengths to remove the brain, but paid extraordinary attention to preserving the heart. It's a striking contrast to our modern view of the brain as the central organ of the mind. Of course, not everyone agrees on the details. Some evidence hints that in earlier periods, brain removal might not have been practiced consistently, or that in some cases the brain was left intact. This debate adds a layer of mystery. Did the embalmers always follow the same ritual, or were there variations depending on the era, status, or personal beliefs? Scholars still argue whether the brain extraction was as standardized as once thought. In this slow, almost hypnotic procedure, you might find yourself oddly mesmerized despite the discomforting reality. It's one of those gross but fascinating moments, like watching a snake shed its skin, repulsive but utterly natural in context. So as the embalmers work away, you're reminded that this is only the beginning of a long, deliberate transformation. Next up, the removal and preservation of the internal organs, the true custodians of the body's essential functions. Stay with me as we continue this slow march through ancient Egyptian embalming. With the brains safely or not so safely extracted, you now watch as the embalmers turn their attention to the body's inner treasures, the vital organs. This part of the process is less icky but no less intense, and it unfolds with a ritualistic precision that blends care symbolism and a touch of mystery. The first organ to go is usually the stomach, followed by the lungs, intestines, and most importantly, the heart. Each organ is removed through a carefully made incision, often on the left side of the abdomen. The embalmers treat these organs with sacred oils and drying agents, preserving them separately in special containers called canopic jars, each guarded by a different protective deity. For example, the jar containing the stomach is protected by Duamutef, the jackal-headed god, while the lungs are under the watchful eyes of Kebesenuef, the falcon-headed god. Here's a fun twist. While the heart was traditionally preserved inside the body, some mummies show evidence that it was removed and treated separately, sometimes even replaced with a stone or a heart scarab, a charm shaped like a beetle meant to protect the heart and help it pass the judgment in the afterlife. Historians still argue whether the heart was always left inside the body, or if this varied depending on time period or individual beliefs. Another quirky detail, some researchers suggest that the canopic jars were not just practical containers, but symbolic vessels representing the four sons of Horus, each tasked with protecting a vital part of the deceased. The belief was that these jars acted as spiritual safeguards, ensuring the organ's safe passage and reuniting them with the body in the afterlife. The process itself is slow and deliberate. You can almost feel the weight of the embalmer's fingers as they gently extract the organs, each step carried out with a reverence that borders on the theatrical. This wasn't just surgery. It was a performance of eternal significance. While the stomach and intestines were sometimes treated more like leftovers to be preserved, the heart's role in the afterlife was paramount. The Egyptians believed the heart would be weighed against the feather of Ma'at, truth and justice, in the hall of judgment, determining whether the soul was worthy of eternal life. As you watch this intricate dance of removal and preservation, you might catch yourself marveling at the Egyptians' blend of early medical knowledge, religious fervor, and artistry. Next, you'll see the body covered in natron salt, beginning the slow process of drying and preserving the flesh itself. Don't worry, it's less gross than it sounds, or at least that's what they thought. Now that the vital organs are tucked safely away in their canopic jars, you watch as the body is laid out for the next crucial stage, dehydration with natron salt. This isn't just sprinkling a little salt like on your fries. No, this is a full-on drying marathon that can last up to 40 days. Imagine the body buried in a coffin-sized bed of this ancient chemical magic, slowly but surely leaching out every last drop of moisture. Natron, a naturally occurring mixture of sodium carbonate, bicarbonate, and salt, was harvested from dry lake beds in Egypt. It's like nature's super desiccant, and the Egyptians knew exactly how to use it. The salt's purpose was to prevent decay by creating an environment too hostile for bacteria to thrive, effectively turning the body into a dry, preserved relic rather than a mushy pile of rot. The process begins with the embalmers covering the entire body inside and out with natron. They shove it into cavities left by the removed organs and pack it under limbs and between fingers. You can almost feel the dry, powdery texture as it coats the corpse, drawing out moisture day by day. This slow dehydration was essential to prevent the body from rotting. But historians still argue whether natron alone was enough or if other substances played a role in preservation. Here's a curious fact: sometimes, instead of using pure natron, embalmers would mix it with resin or oils, creating a sticky, crusty layer that not only dried the body, but sealed it. It's like ancient Egyptian glue, messy but effective. Some mummies show signs of this resin coating, and there's ongoing debate about how widespread this practice was. During these weeks of salt drying, the embalmers would periodically turn the body, checking the progress and adding more natron as needed. This slow, repetitive ritual may have felt endless for those involved, but it was necessary for success. You might even say it's the ancient equivalent of waiting for paint to dry, but with way higher stakes. Interestingly, some bodies were dried for shorter periods or treated differently, leading to a variety of mummy conditions. Historians still debate how much time was considered standard and whether social status affected the length or style of drying. So as you picture this lengthy, patient process, remember it wasn't just science. It was part of a sacred ritual. Up next, the embalmers will begin the delicate art of wrapping the body in linen, each strip a layer of protection and symbolism, wrapping the dead for their eternal voyage. As the natron works its slow drying magic, the embalmers begin the delicate, almost hypnotic process of wrapping the body in linen. This isn't your average gift wrap session. It's a painstaking ritual full of symbolism and care that can stretch over days. You watch as long strips of linen, sometimes hundreds of meters, are gently pulled, folded, and wrapped around the limbs and torso in precise patterns. Each strip is laid with intention. The embalmers wrap the fingers and toes first, as if sealing off the extremities to protect the entire vessel. Layer upon layer goes on the fabric, overlapping in crisscross patterns that not only secure the body, but also symbolize binding the soul to the physical form. Sometimes resin or oils are applied between layers to glue the wrappings in place and add a fragrant sealant. The smell of dried palm resin mixes with the earthy scent of the linen, creating an atmosphere thick with ritual significance. Here's a quirky detail: some mummies show evidence that amulets and charms were slipped between layers of linen, tiny magical tools designed to protect the deceased on their journey. These little talismans were thought to ward off evil spirits and guide the soul safely through the underworld. Historians still argue about the exact placement and number of these amulets, as different mummies reveal different patterns. Wrapping wasn't just about protection. It was an art form requiring patience and skill. Imagine embalmers working in near silence, their fingers nimble, carefully folding and smoothing each bandage to avoid wrinkles or tears. They had to balance speed with reverence, ensuring the body was fully covered but not so tightly bound as to cause damage. The linen itself was prized. It was often fine white and linen made from flax grown along the Nile's fertile banks. In some cases, wealthier individuals might have had more luxurious linen, adding another layer of social distinction to the process. As the wrapping continues, you might feel the slow heartbeat of this ritual, repetitive, soothing, almost meditative. The body is being transformed from a mortal shell into a sacred vessel ready for eternity. Up next, we'll dive into the debated fate of the heart. Did it stay inside the mummy, or was it removed? That question has kept scholars debating for centuries. Now that the body is snugly wrapped in layers of linen, it's time to turn your attention to the heart, the ancient Egyptians' most sacred organ. You already know the brain was often removed, but what about this mysterious symbol of emotion, intelligence, and moral judgment? The answer isn't as clear-cut as you might think, and historians still argue over the heart's exact fate during mummification. Most Egyptian texts suggest that the heart was meant to stay inside the body, beating eternally in the afterlife. After all, the heart would later be weighed against the feather of Ma'at in the Hall of Judgment, a moment that could determine the soul's fate. So keeping it intact and within the body seemed essential. But here's the twist. Archaeological findings have uncovered mummies where the heart was removed, replaced by heart scarabs, amulets shaped like beetles inscribed with spells to protect the deceased's spirit. This dual approach has led to heated scholarly debates. Did the Egyptians change their beliefs over time? Were there differences depending on social status or the period? Some argue that in earlier dynasties, the heart was always preserved inside the body. But during later periods, heart scarabs became more common, possibly due to evolving religious practices or practical concerns like body preservation. And speaking of practical concerns, it's fascinating to think that the heart was seen as not only spiritual, but also physical. The Egyptians believed it was the seat of intelligence, emotion, and memory, a view that runs counter to our modern understanding of the brain. They considered the heart to be the center of life itself, which explains the care taken to preserve or symbolically protect it. Another intriguing detail, some mummies reveal that the heart was embalmed separately and placed back inside the chest cavity wrapped in linen or protected by a scarab amulet. This suggests a compromise between ritual symbolism and practical mummification techniques. As you ponder the heart's mysterious journey inside-outside or symbolically replaced, you realize how central this organ was to ancient Egyptian spirituality. The heart wasn't just a body part. It was the very essence of the person's identity, their moral compass in the afterlife. Next, the embalmers move on to sealing the body with resins and oils, sticky, fragrant substances that protected the mummy and may have held magical significance. Stick around because this part smells amazing and is as mysterious as it is practical. With the heart's fate sealed, sometimes literally, the embalmers begin an aromatic phase of the process, covering the mummy with resins, oils, and balms. Imagine the rich, sticky scent of pine and myrrh thickening the air, mingling with the dryness of the natron and the faint mustiness of linen. This fragrant coating wasn't just for smell. It was a crucial preservative and spiritual safeguard. Resins, often sourced from distant trees like the pistachia and frankincense varieties, were melted into sticky pastes. The embalmers carefully rubbed these balms all over the body, sealing the linen wrappings and creating a hardened shell. This shell helped protect the mummy from moisture and decay, while also symbolically encasing the deceased in divine substances. You can almost imagine the embalmers dipping their fingers into the thick resin, their hands coated with sticky amber gold. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some mummies were coated with up to 5 different types of resins, each with its own symbolic and preservative properties. Historians still argue whether this resin layering was standard practice or varied based on wealth and regional tradition. The oils used were also important, not just for preservation, but for their association with rebirth and renewal. Think of them as the ancient equivalent of moisturizing lotion, but with magical overtones. They were thought to soften the body and prepare it for the afterlife, making the deceased appear more alive, despite the obvious opposite. During this phase, the embalmers might chant or perform additional rites to invoke protection from the gods. The sticky process was laborious and slow, requiring patience as the resins cooled and hardened. You might notice the striking contrast between the body's dry, mummified state and the fresh, wet gloss of the applied balms. Interestingly, some studies suggest that the specific recipes for these resins and oils varied significantly over time and place, reflecting both practical experimentation and evolving religious symbolism. As the resin layer sets, it's almost as if the mummy is donning a golden armor, protecting not only its physical form, but also its spiritual essence. Next, we'll see how the embalmers completed the ritual by placing the mummy in coffins. Some plain, some intricately decorated, and preparing it for its final journey. After the fragrant resin layer hardens, you now witness the body's final transformation, its placement inside a coffin or series of coffins. These coffins were more than mere containers. They were symbolic vessels designed to protect and honor the deceased, crafted with care to ensure safe passage into the afterlife. Depending on the era and the deceased's wealth, the mummy might be placed in a simple wooden coffin or nested within multiple coffins, sometimes 3 or 4 each, richly decorated with religious texts, protective spells, and vibrant imagery of gods, goddesses, and symbols. Imagine the embalmers carefully lowering the wrapped mummy into the coffin, then sealing it tight, almost like tucking in a child for a long sleep. Here's a curious fact. Some coffins were anthropoid, shaped like a human body designed to resemble the deceased, complete with painted facial features. This was believed to help the soul recognize its body and reunite with it. Historians still argue whether the degree of coffin decoration was more about social status or evolving religious beliefs. In wealthier tombs, the coffin was part of a larger ensemble nested inside a stone sarcophagus, placed within a decorated burial chamber filled with grave goods and offerings. These goods ranged from food and jewelry to everyday items intended to provide comfort and utility in the afterlife. An interesting detail, some coffins contain inscriptions known as Book of the Dead spells, designed to guide the soul through the perilous journey in the underworld. These texts served as spiritual GPS, offering instructions and protection against obstacles. Scholars debate how personalized these texts were, whether they were customized for the individual or standardized copies. As the coffin lid is secured, you get a sense of finality, a last physical embrace around the body. The embalmer's work shifts from the physical to the spiritual, as priests perform rituals to consecrate the mummy and prepare it for burial. The sealing of the coffin marks the near end of the embalming journey, but the story isn't quite over. Soon the mummy will be transported to its final resting place, where the eternal journey truly begins. Now, with the mummy safely encased in its coffin, you join the procession to the tomb, an important final step in the journey toward immortality. This procession wasn't just a somber funeral march. It was a carefully orchestrated ceremony, filled with symbolic acts meant to ensure the deceased's smooth transition from the world of the living to the realm of the dead. Imagine the mourners dressed in linen, the priests carrying sacred objects and chanting prayers. The air is thick with incense smoke and the soft rustling of feet on desert sand. The body's journey to the tomb is accompanied by ritual recitations designed to awaken the mummy's senses and prepare the soul for the afterlife. One fascinating detail, the opening of the mouth ceremony performed by priests using special tools, was believed to magically restore the deceased's ability to eat, speak, and breathe in the afterlife. You might picture a priest delicately touching the mummy's mouth with a ritual blade or adze whispering incantations. Historians still debate the exact timing and variations of this ceremony across different periods. As the procession arrives at the tomb, whether a simple pit grave or a grand burial chamber carved into limestone cliffs, the coffin is carefully lowered into place. The tomb itself might be adorned with painted scenes depicting the deceased's life gods and protective symbols. This visual storytelling helped ensure the deceased's identity and status were preserved for eternity. Another quirky aspect, some tombs contained false doors, painted or carved openings through which the soul could come and go. It's like ancient Egyptian spiritual technology, allowing the deceased to access offerings left by the living. Historians still argue about how much participation the deceased's family had in these burial rites, and whether elaborate tombs always guaranteed a better afterlife, or were more about social prestige. As the tomb is sealed, you might feel the eerie finality of the moment, but also a profound sense of hope. The physical journey ends here, but the spiritual voyage has just begun. Next, you'll explore the fascinating beliefs behind the Egyptian concept of the soul, its parts, powers, and perilous journey after death. As the tomb's heavy door seals shut behind the mourners, you now step into the complex world of ancient Egyptian beliefs about the soul, a fascinating, multifaceted concept that guided every step of the mummification process. The Egyptians didn't think of the soul as a single entity, but as several distinct parts, each with its own role and destiny in the afterlife. First, there's the ka, often described as the life force, or vital essence, the part that gave a person their energy while alive. The ka was believed to remain close to the body after death, needing sustenance in the form of food and drink offerings left by family or priests. Without these offerings, the ka would starve, and the soul's journey would falter. This is why tombs were stocked with elaborate meals, and why mummies were so carefully preserved. The body was a home for the ka. Then comes the ba, often depicted as a human-headed bird, which represented personality, mobility, and freedom. The ba was thought to be able to leave the tomb and move freely between the living world and the afterlife, visiting loved ones or checking on the world it left behind. But the ba needed a preserved body to return to at night, making mummification essential for its survival. Here's a quirky twist. Some texts suggest the ba could be mischievous, even playing tricks on the living or getting lost, which might explain why elaborate protective spells were inscribed in tombs. Historians still debate how much agency the ba was thought to have, and whether it could truly act independently. Next is the ak, the immortal, transformed spirit that could interact with gods and the living world. Achieving this state required successful passage through judgment, symbolized by the weighing of the heart ceremony and proper mummification rituals. Without becoming an ak, the soul was doomed to wander or fade away. Finally, the shadow and name were also vital parts of the soul's existence. The shadow was seen as a person's double, capable of protective magic, while preserving one's name through inscriptions was crucial to maintain identity after death. Destroying a name or shadow was considered a curse worse than death itself. These complex beliefs underscore why mummification was much more than preservation. It was a sacred preparation for a soul's full journey. Historians still argue how these concepts evolved over millennia and varied by region and social class. As you drift deeper into these ancient mysteries, prepare to hear more about the famous weighing of the heart ritual, where fate was decided by divine judgment. Spoiler alert, it's not quite like your local courtroom. Picture yourself standing in the grand hall of Ma'at, where the most critical moment of the ancient Egyptian afterlife unfolds, the weighing of the heart. This ceremony wasn't just spiritual theater. It was a divine audit that determined if the soul could pass into eternal bliss or face oblivion. At the center of this cosmic courtroom stands Anubis, the jackal-headed god of embalming and protector of the dead, who carefully places the deceased's heart on one side of a gigantic golden scale. On the other side, he places the feather of Ma'at, the goddess of truth, justice, and cosmic order. If the heart, heavy with sin or impurity, outweighs the feather, the soul faces a grim fate, devoured by Amit, a fearsome beast part, crocodile, lion, and hippopotamus. Imagine the tension your heart, the essence of your morality and deeds, balanced against the pure light feather of truth. The scale tips and your fate hangs in the balance. The ancient Egyptians believed this moment was the ultimate test of worthiness. But here's an intriguing scholarly debate. Was the heart always preserved for this weighing? Some mummies lack evidence of a heart replaced instead with symbolic scarabs. Did these represent the heart during judgment, or was the ritual more symbolic? In some cases, historians continue to puzzle over these inconsistencies. If your heart passes the test, the god Thoth, with his ibis head, records the verdict, and the soul is granted passage to the field of reeds, an idealized paradise, mirroring earthly life with endless fields and bountiful harvests. Meanwhile, Osiris, lord of the underworld, awaits to welcome the purified soul, granting it eternal life. His throne is said to be surrounded by the souls of the righteous, a serene and luminous gathering. A quirky detail, some funerary texts suggest that the deceased needed to memorize over 200 spells and declarations of innocence to convince the gods during this judgment. Imagine having to recite all that without a single slip-up talk about pressure. This divine weighing encapsulates why mummification was so vital. It preserved the body, housed the soul, and prepared it for this ultimate reckoning. Up next, we'll explore the afterlife itself, a mysterious realm full of wonder, danger, and hope. After passing the trial of the scales, your journey continues into the mysterious and enchanting afterlife, often called the Field of Reeds. Picture it as an eternal Egyptian countryside, bathed in golden sunlight, with fertile fields stretching endlessly, an idealized version of the life you lived, but free of hardship. This paradise was where your soul could live in peace, surrounded by family, friends, and the gods. Unlike many grim visions of the afterlife, the Field of Reeds promised comfort, plenty, and eternal happiness. But only if you played by the rules. A fascinating tidbit, the afterlife was imagined as remarkably familiar to the Egyptians, complete with farming, fishing, and feasting. Your soul might fish in crystal-clear canals or harvest crops in perfect abundance, all without breaking a sweat. Historians still debate whether this vision evolved over time from more chaotic or ominous underworld ideas. However, not all was perfect. The journey there was perilous, and the soul had to avoid traps, monsters, and deceptive spirits lurking in the dark. Some tomb paintings and texts warned of these dangers, giving the deceased spells and protective charms to stay safe. One quirky element, the deceased soul sometimes had to cross a lake of fire or face serpents to reach paradise. These challenges were symbolic of purification and transformation, preparing the soul for its new existence. Scholars also argue about the level of detail and personalization in these afterlife visions. Did ordinary people truly believe in such elaborate paradises, or was it mainly a royal and priestly fantasy? Archaeological evidence suggests widespread belief, but varying degrees of emphasis, depending on time and status. As you imagine yourself wandering these endless fields, it's clear the ancient Egyptians' hopes for the afterlife were deeply tied to the rituals performed in life and death. The mummification process then wasn't just about the physical. It was about securing your place in this perfect, eternal world. Coming up next, the roles of priests and embalmers, the specialists who turn this intricate vision into reality. Now imagine the skilled hands and solemn faces of the embalmers and priests who made all of this possible, the unseen heroes of the mummification process. These specialists were both craftsmen and spiritual guides, entrusted with a sacred responsibility that combined anatomy, chemistry, and religion. The embalmers operated in a highly ritualized setting, often within special embalming workshops located near the necropolis. Their tools were surprisingly sophisticated bronze knives, hooks, and drills used to carefully remove internal organs without damaging the body's exterior. Picture them working methodically, their hands steady despite the somewhat grisly task. One quirky fact, some embalmers were actually priests of Anubis, the jackal-headed god of embalming and the dead. This divine association reinforced the sacred nature of their work, blending practical skill with ritual purity. Historians still debate how much medical knowledge these embalmers possessed, versus relying on ritual instructions. The priests recited spells and prayers throughout the process, invoking protection from gods like Osiris Isis and Thoth. The rituals were believed to animate the mummy, allowing the soul to recognize and reunite with its body. You might imagine the atmosphere thick with incense and solemn chants echoing through the embalming chamber. Interestingly, embalming methods varied over time and by region. Some workshops preferred longer drying periods. Others focused more on the spiritual rites. There's also evidence that embalmers experimented with different ingredients, such as unique resins or natron mixtures, adjusting techniques to improve preservation. Here's an open question. Historians ponder, how standardized were embalming procedures across Egypt? Was there a central official method, or did techniques vary widely, influenced by local traditions, resources, and the deceased's social status? Regardless, these priests and embalmers were key players in the ancient Egyptians' quest for immortality, bridging the worlds of science and religion, with each carefully wrapped linen bandage. Next, we'll dive into the fascinating symbolism behind the linen wrappings themselves. More than just fabric, they were protective armor and spiritual blankets. Now, as you gaze upon the countless layers of linen wrapped around a mummy, you might wonder why so many. These wrappings weren't just about keeping the body intact. They were imbued with deep symbolic meaning and practical magic. The linen strips, sometimes hundreds of feet long, were carefully wound around the body in complex patterns. Each layer served as a protective barrier, almost like ancient armor, guarding the deceased from physical decay and spiritual harm. The process was slow and meticulous, requiring skill and patience to avoid damaging the fragile corpse underneath. But the wrappings had more than a practical purpose. They symbolized rebirth, mimicking the cocoon of a chrysalis, preparing the soul for transformation into the afterlife. Some wrappings included tiny amulets, placed between layers, each charged with specific protective powers, a miniature magical toolkit. Here's a fun fact: some mummies have been found wrapped in linen inscribed with prayers or spells. Imagine the embalmers chanting as they carefully wrap the body, each layer strengthening the magical shield. Historians still debate how widespread this practice was, and whether these inscriptions were personalized or mass-produced. Another curious detail: the color and quality of the linen could vary, reflecting the deceased's wealth and status. Royal mummies often had the finest linen, bleached and pristine, while commoners might have simpler wrappings. This variation highlights the social aspect of the afterlife journey. Immortality wasn't exactly democratic. The linen itself was made from flax, a plant cultivated along the Nile, connecting the mummy to the life-giving river even in death. This natural material was light, breathable, and surprisingly durable, perfect for long-term preservation in Egypt's dry climate. And remember that resin coating from earlier, it often soaked into the linen, sealing it and adding another layer of protection. The combined effect was a mummy encased in a resin-hardened linen shell, like a time capsule built to last millennia. Soon we'll explore the fascinating burial goods placed with the mummy, everything from everyday tools to mystical artifacts, all intended to assist the deceased soul in the next world. As the mummy rests, wrapped and sealed, you can't help but wonder about the treasures placed alongside it. Burial goods that tell stories of status, belief, and hope for eternity. These items weren't mere trinkets. They were carefully chosen to serve and protect the deceased in the afterlife. From jewelry and weapons to food and furniture, each object had a purpose. Imagine a beautifully carved wooden statue or a simple ceramic jar filled with grain. These goods were meant to ensure comfort, provide sustenance, and even offer magical aid. Historians still debate how much of this was practical versus symbolic. Did these items really accompany the soul, or were they tokens of memory left behind by the living one? Quirky example, Shabbat figures, small servant statuettes were buried with the dead to perform manual labor in the afterlife. These little helpers were often inscribed with spells commanding them to work on behalf of the deceased, sparing the soul from menial tasks. Imagine having your own supernatural workforce, pretty convenient. The types and quantity of burial goods varied widely depending on wealth and time period. Pharaohs' tombs might be overflowing with gold, elaborate furniture, and even chariots, while commoners had modest offerings. Yet even simple graves could include personalized items reflecting individual identity and hope. Food offerings were also vital: bread, beer, fruits, and meat to nourish the ka, which needed sustenance. Tomb paintings often depict banquet scenes, reminding the soul of joyous feasts to come. There's still debate whether actual food lasted long enough or was mainly symbolic. As you picture these objects resting silently beside the mummy, you get a sense of the ancient Egyptians' profound desire to ensure no aspect of life was left behind. The afterlife was meant to be a full continuation, not a ghostly echo. Next, we'll slow down for a gentle wind down, reflecting on the magic, mystery, and humanity behind this ancient ritual. Now let's slow down and take a deep breath, letting the vast mystery of ancient Egyptian mummification gently settle around you. Imagine the quiet desert night, the cool breeze brushing softly against the tomb's stone walls, and the faint flicker of an oil lamp illuminating the intricate patterns on the linen wrappings. Here, time seems to stretch and blend, folding ancient secrets with your own sleepy thoughts. You might feel the delicate weight of history pressing softly like a warm blanket. These rituals, carried out thousands of years ago, reveal a people deeply connected to life, death, and what might lie beyond. It's humbling to consider how much care, knowledge, and belief went into every step, from removing the organs to the final prayers whispered over the sealed tomb. Imagine the embalmer's hands, steady yet tender, weaving magic with linen and resin, crafting not just a preserved body, but a vessel for eternity. The chants echo faintly, a lullaby for the soul's journey, a bridge between worlds. You might smile at the thought that even then the ancient Egyptians knew that the boundary between life and death was as fragile as a single thread. This is a moment to honor the mystery, to rest in the quiet space where science and spirituality meet. Historians still argue about many details, but the core truth remains. Mummification was an act of hope, a sacred promise that death was not the end, but a transformation. So, as you begin to drift, remember the story of the mummy, wrapped carefully in linen, protected by spells, surrounded by loved ones' hopes. The ancient Egyptians believed in a magic that could defy time itself. And maybe, just maybe, that magic still whispers to us tonight. With your mind still wrapped in the quiet magic of the wind down, the journey resumes as we explore the fascinating evolution of mummification through Egypt's long history. The techniques, beliefs, and social significance of this ancient practice shifted over thousands of years, reflecting changes in religion, politics, and technology. Starting in the Old Kingdom, mummification was relatively simple. Bodies were dried naturally in the desert sand or buried in shallow pits, relying on the environment's dryness to preserve them. You can almost imagine an ancient embalmer tossing a body into a sandy pit and letting nature do its work, a far cry from the elaborate rituals to come. As time progressed into the Middle and New Kingdoms, the process became more sophisticated. The introduction of natron, a natural salt mixture, revolutionized preservation by drying out the body more effectively. Embalmers developed intricate procedures for removing organs, applying resins, and wrapping the body in linen. One quirky note: some early mummies had their brains removed through the nose, using hooked instruments, an oddly invasive practice that sometimes resulted in brain matter still left inside. The Egyptians believed the brain was unimportant and discarded it, favoring the heart as the seat of intelligence and emotion. Historians still debate why this belief persisted despite the physical evidence. In the late period, mummification became more standardized, influenced by religious texts like the Book of the Dead, which prescribed specific spells and rituals. The rise of mass production techniques also made mummification more accessible to the middle classes. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about how commercialized mummification became. Did it lose some of its sacred meaning when it became a business? Or did the rituals maintain their spiritual power regardless of scale? These shifts show that mummification was a living tradition, adapting to meet the needs and beliefs of each era. You're now seeing not just a frozen moment, but a dynamic story of ancient culture evolving over millennia. Coming up next, the fascinating role of funerary art and hieroglyphs in guiding and protecting the soul. As you follow the mummy's journey deeper into the tomb, you encounter the stunning funerary art and hieroglyphs that adorn the walls more than just decoration. These images and writings served vital spiritual and practical roles. They were guides, prayers, and protective spells, all crafted to assist the deceased soul on its path through the afterlife. Picture the vibrant colors and intricate scenes, gods welcoming the soul boats, sailing across celestial waters, and scenes of daily life that the soul could enjoy forever. These paintings and inscriptions formed a visual roadmap, helping the spirit navigate the complex underworld and avoid dangerous obstacles. One fascinating detail is the Book of the Dead, a collection of spells and incantations written on papyrus scrolls or painted on tomb walls. These texts functioned like ancient user manuals for the afterlife, instructing the soul on what to say and do to pass various trials. Imagine memorizing or carrying these cheat sheets for eternity. Historians still debate the extent to which these texts and images reflected popular beliefs versus elite ideology. Were they meant mainly for pharaohs and nobles, or did common people also engage with these spiritual guides? Another quirky tidbit: some hieroglyphs used in tombs were deliberately written backwards or upside down to confuse evil spirits, like ancient magical passwords meant to ward off troublemakers. It's almost like the Egyptians had their own version of digital encryption. The art itself evolved stylistically over time, but remained deeply symbolic. Colors had meaning. Green symbolized rebirth, red indicated chaos or danger, and gold represented divine flesh. Every brushstroke was intentional, blending aesthetics with spiritual function. This rich visual language was crucial in supporting the complex beliefs surrounding death and immortality. It's a reminder that for the ancient Egyptians, art and religion were inseparable, working together to keep the soul safe and the legacy alive. Next, we'll examine the fascinating role of animals in Egyptian funerary practices, from sacred pets to symbolic creatures. As you wander through the corridors of the afterlife, the presence of animals becomes strikingly clear. In ancient Egypt, animals weren't just companions or food sources. They were sacred beings, intertwined deeply with religion, magic, and the journey after death. Many Egyptians mummified animals: cats, ibis birds, crocodiles, even bulls, believing these creatures held spiritual power or represented gods. Imagine a perfectly preserved cat mummy lying quietly in its tiny coffin, revered as a protector or guide. These animal mummies served as offerings, guardians, or companions for the deceased. One curious fact: some animals were mummified on mass scales, almost like ancient pets on demand. Pilgrims bought these sacred mummies at temples as offerings to specific gods, turning animal mummification into a booming religious business. Historians still discuss how this commercialization affected the sanctity of the practice. Animals also symbolized divine traits. The jackal-headed Anubis watched over embalming and burial. The falcon Horus represented kingship and the sky, while the cat goddess Bastet protected homes and fertility. These associations gave animals a powerful role in funerary art and rituals. There's an ongoing debate about whether animal mummies were primarily symbolic or if some animals were truly companions, expected to join their owners in the afterlife. Some tombs even contain tiny boats for animal souls to sail with their human counterparts. This close relationship between humans and animals highlights the Egyptians' unique worldview where life, death, nature, and divinity seamlessly blended. Animals weren't just part of the journey. They were guides, protectors, and participants in the eternal cycle. Coming up, the final section wraps up this incredible journey through mummification and explores its lasting legacy in modern times. As your eyes grow heavy and the story nears its end, reflect on the incredible journey you've just taken through the ancient Egyptian mummification process, a blend of science, religion, art, and magic, all aimed at defeating death and embracing eternity. You've seen how embalmers delicately removed organs, wrapped bodies in countless linen layers, and infused them with resins that hardened like armor. You've walked through tombs adorned with colorful hieroglyphs, spells, and images designed to guide and protect the soul. You've met sacred animals, powerful gods, and curious rituals that still puzzle historians today. Mummification was not just a practice, but a powerful expression of hope, identity, and belief. It showed a culture's unwavering faith that death was a doorway, not a full stop, and that the soul's journey could be safeguarded by human hands and divine favor. Interestingly, modern science owes much to these ancient practices. The techniques of preservation influenced early medicine and anatomy studies. And today, the fascination with mummies continues to inspire archaeologists, artists, and storytellers worldwide. Historians still argue about many details: how exactly embalming rituals evolved, what everyday Egyptians believed, and how these practices varied over time and region. But the core mystery remains a timeless testament to human creativity and spirituality. So as you drift off, remember this: the ancient Egyptians wrapped their dead, not just in linen, but in stories, prayers, and dreams of eternal life. And now, those dreams softly whisper across the centuries, inviting you to imagine the magic, mystery, and wonder of a civilization that dared to challenge the finality of death. Sweet dreams, and may your own journey be as rich and mysterious as theirs. We embark on an extraordinary journey into the heart of ancient Egypt's most sacred secret, the real mummification process of a mighty pharaoh. Picture yourself in the sweltering heat of the Nile Valley, as priests clad in linen robes prepare to preserve a king's body for eternity. You probably won't survive this journey because it's full of strange rituals, sticky resins, and more than a little mystery. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Wherever you're watching from, drop your location and local time in the comments. I'm curious how far and wide this story travels. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Our story begins with Pharaoh Ramses II, one of the most powerful and long-reigning rulers of ancient Egypt. Known as the Great Ancestor, Ramses ruled for over 60 years during the 13th century BCE. His reign was marked by grand building projects, fierce battles, and a reputation for divine kingship. When Ramses II finally passed away, his death was not just a personal tragedy, but a cosmic event. The entire kingdom entered mourning, and elaborate preparations began to ensure his safe passage to the afterlife. We'll follow every step of his embalming, from the moment his body was taken to the embalming house, through the delicate process of preservation. This wasn't just science, it was sacred magic combining ritual anatomy and devotion. Stay with me as we unravel how the priests of ancient Egypt transformed a mortal king into a timeless legend. The moment Pharaoh Ramses II died, the kingdom shifted into a state of solemn ritual and profound respect. His death was announced across the land, drums beating slowly, mourners wailing in temples and streets. This wasn't just the end of a man's life. It was a cosmic disturbance, signaling the transition of a god on earth to the eternal realms beyond. You can almost hear the hushed whispers among the priests, their faces serious beneath the shadows of temple columns. They quickly organized the first rites of the funerary process. These initial rituals were crucial, for they set the stage for the body's transformation. The deceased king's body was washed with sacred water, purified by incense and prayers. Linen wrappings were removed carefully, and the body was laid upon a stone slab in the embalming house, a sanctified space reserved for such divine work. Here, the embalming priests, known as the Nefer, would begin their sacred task. Imagine the heavy scent of natron myrrh and cedar filling the air, mixing with the solemn chants that echoed off sandstone walls. These chants were believed to invoke the protection of Anubis, the jackal-headed god of embalming, who guided the dead safely through their passage. Interestingly, some accounts mention the use of crocodile dung as a form of antiseptic during these early preparations, a detail that might make you pause. But the Egyptians had their own brand of ancient science, no matter how peculiar it sounds to modern ears. Historians still argue about the exact order of these opening ceremonies. Were they more about spiritual cleansing or practical preservation? And how much of the ritual was designed to comfort the living rather than serve the dead? From this sacred beginning, the body was ready to embark on the complex and fascinating journey of mummification, a process both scientific and mystical. Once the initial rites had been performed, the embalming team prepared to move Ramses II's body to the dedicated embalming workshop, a separate structure within the necropolis specially designed for this sacred process. Imagine the solemn procession priests carrying the king's body on a wooden bier draped in fine linens, carefully navigating narrow corridors lined with painted hieroglyphs depicting protective spells. The journey itself was laden with ritual significance. Each step was accompanied by prayers and incantations meant to shield the king's soul from malevolent spirits lurking in the shadows. The Egyptians believed that the spirit or Ka could linger near the body, so protecting it was vital. As you imagine this procession, consider the contrast between the bustling city and the eerie silence inside the embalming house. The workshop was a place of both science and magic, where anatomy met spirituality. Once inside, the body was gently laid on a stone slab. The embalming priests began their detailed examination, using finely honed tools to prepare for the next stage. They inspected the body for any damage, taking note of wounds or imperfections that might affect preservation. A curious detail, some embalming tools were made from obsidian, a volcanic glass, so sharp it could perform precise incisions without crushing tissue. You can almost feel the cool touch of these blades, precise and unforgiving. Historians still debate how advanced Egyptian anatomical knowledge truly was. Some suggest embalming priests had surprisingly detailed understanding of human organs, while others argue much was ritual rather than medical. This crucial moment marked the true beginning of the preservation process, one that combined reverence ritual and remarkable practical skill. With Ramses II's body now in the embalming workshop, the priests commenced the critical and delicate task of preparing it for eternal preservation. First came the careful removal of the internal organs, an essential step as decay begins most rapidly inside the body. The embalmers made a precise incision on the left side of the abdomen, using those razor-sharp obsidian blades. This allowed them to extract the stomach, intestines, lungs, and liver with incredible skill. Each organ was then treated separately, wrapped in linen, and stored in special containers called canopic jars, each guarded by a protective deity to safeguard the organs for the afterlife. Interestingly, the heart was often left inside the body, as it was believed to be the seat of intelligence and emotion, crucial for the final judgment before Osiris, god of the dead. However, some records show exceptions, sparking ongoing debate among scholars about whether the heart was always preserved or sometimes removed for separate treatment. After organ removal, the embalming priests focused on preserving the body itself. They cleaned the abdominal cavity thoroughly, washing it with palm wine and infused oils to stave off bacterial decay. The priests worked with a ritualistic precision, ensuring no sacred part was neglected. Here's a quirky tidbit to stop the body from smelling bad during the process. The embalmers used various perfumes and incense, not unlike a modern-day air freshener, just far more elaborate and spiritual. Historians still argue about the precise sequence of organ removal and whether embalming methods evolved significantly over different dynasties or remained relatively consistent. Next, the body would undergo the crucial drying phase, setting the stage for its remarkable preservation. After the internal organs were carefully removed and stored, the embalming priests turned their attention to the all-important drying process, a cornerstone of ancient Egyptian mummification. Without effectively removing moisture, the body would quickly decay, defeating the entire purpose. Here's where natron, a naturally occurring mixture of sodium carbonate, sodium bicarbonate, and salt, entered the scene. Imagine large piles of this white powdery mineral laid out on stone tables ready to work its desiccating magic. The body was covered completely with natron, both inside and out, and left to rest for about 40 days. This lengthy period ensured that moisture was drawn out thoroughly, turning the flesh into a much drier, more stable substance that could resist decay for millennia. You might picture the priests carefully turning the body periodically, making sure every inch was equally treated. This was no quick spray and go, but an intricate, patient process demanding devotion and attention to detail. There's an intriguing note: some tombs show natron packed not only around the body, but also inside the skull and even the nasal cavity. The belief was that every hidden space had to be purified and preserved. Historians still debate whether the 40-day natron period was a strict rule or varied depending on climate urgency or the status of the deceased. Some evidence suggests shorter times might have been used in certain cases, perhaps for less prominent individuals. With the body now dehydrated and stabilized, the embalmers prepared for the next vital step, wrapping the body to protect it for eternity. After the body had been thoroughly dried with natron, the embalming priests began the meticulous process of wrapping Ramses II in layers of fine linen, each strip carefully measured, folded, and placed with purpose. This wasn't just a practical way to protect the body. It was a sacred ritual steeped in symbolism and magic. Imagine the cool touch of smooth linen against the body as it was wrapped layer by layer like a cocoon spun to last forever. Between these layers, priests tucked small amulets and charms meant to guard the pharaoh's soul against evil spirits and guide him safely through the underworld. One of the more unusual details is that some wrappings were coated with resins and oils, sticky substances that hardened to create a protective shell, almost like ancient plastic. These substances also helped preserve the linen and sealed the body from moisture. As the wrapping progressed, priests recited spells from the Book of the Dead prayers designed to invoke protection and blessings. You can almost hear their rhythmic chants echoing through the embalming chamber, creating a hypnotic backdrop to the physical work. Interestingly, the process could take several weeks with breaks for rituals and to allow the resin coatings to dry. Wrapping was a slow dance of devotion and precision. Historians still argue over the extent to which wrapping styles and materials changed over Egypt's long history. Some suggest shifts reflected evolving religious beliefs, others see practical improvements. Once the wrapping was complete, the body was nearly ready to be adorned with the iconic funerary mask and placed in its nested coffins, but there was still one last sacred step. With Ramses II now fully wrapped in his sacred linen shrouds, the embalming priests prepared to place the iconic funerary mask upon his face, an essential step to ensure the king's identity was preserved for eternity. This mask wasn't just a decoration. It was a powerful symbol connecting the pharaoh to the gods, especially Osiris, the lord of the afterlife. Imagine the golden mask, shimmering in the flickering torchlight, crafted with exquisite detail, the serene visage, the false beard symbolizing divine kingship, and the intricate patterns that told stories of protection and power. This mask acted like a spiritual passport, helping the deceased soul recognize its own body during the journey through the afterlife. The mask was typically made of gold, inlaid with precious stones like lapis lazuli and turquoise. This wasn't just luxury. It was believed that gold was the flesh of the gods, eternal and unchanging. A quirky fact: some funerary masks had tiny holes drilled near the ears or mouth to allow the soul to breathe and speak. It's as if the ancient Egyptians thought even in death the king might want to whisper secrets or hear prayers. Historians still debate how much the design and materials of these masks varied between dynasties or regions, with some suggesting the most elaborate masks belonged only to the wealthiest or most divine rulers. Once the mask was secured, the wrapped and adorned body was ready to be placed inside a series of coffins, each one nested inside the other, like a set of Russian dolls designed to protect the king's body through countless millennia. This process was not merely practical. It was a sacred ritual ensuring that Ramses II would live forever, both physically and spiritually. After the funerary mask was carefully fitted, Ramses II's mummy was gently placed inside the first of several coffins, each more elaborately decorated than the last. These coffins nested one inside another, creating multiple layers of protection that served both spiritual and physical purposes. Picture this: a set of coffins carved from cedar wood, coated in resin, and painted with vivid colors and symbols. The outermost coffin often depicted Ramses as a god, his body adorned with images of gods, protective spells, and hieroglyphs meant to guide and protect his soul on its perilous journey. The coffins weren't just containers. They were a moving canvas of religious art and magical symbolism. Each layer was believed to strengthen the king's defenses against evil forces and ensure his resurrection. A curious detail sometimes: the coffins were inscribed with spells from the Book of the Dead, personalized to the individual's journey. Imagine the artisans painstakingly painting each symbol by hand, knowing their work had eternal significance. Historians still debate the degree to which these coffins evolved stylistically over time and whether certain designs reflected shifts in religious beliefs or political power. Once the mummy was securely nested inside these coffins, the entire ensemble was transported to the tomb, often a hidden chamber carved deep within cliffs or beneath pyramids. But before final sealing, there was one last sacred ceremony to perform, marking the transition from earthly life to eternal rest. The final sacred ceremony before Ramses II's eternal rest was the opening of the mouth ritual, a dramatic and deeply symbolic rite that aimed to restore the pharaoh's senses for the afterlife. Imagine a priest dressed in linen and adorned with ritual paint, performing precise gestures over the mummy using special tools to touch the lips, eyes, ears, and nose. This ceremony was believed to magically enable the deceased to eat, see, hear, and speak again in the next world. Without it, the soul might be trapped, unable to interact with the gods or survive the judgment of Osiris. The ritual included reciting powerful incantations, waving sacred objects, and even touching the mummy's mouth with a ceremonial adze, a tool shaped like a small axe, symbolizing the cutting of bonds between death and life. A quirky bit of history: some depictions show the priest wearing a mask of Anubis, the jackal-headed god of embalming, emphasizing the divine protection over the ritual. Historians still debate whether this ceremony was performed only once or repeated multiple times during the burial process. Some think it might have also been symbolic, a spiritual reset, rather than a literal physical act. With this rite complete, Ramses II's mummy was truly prepared to begin its journey in the afterlife, fully restored and empowered. Now imagine the heavy stone door sealing the tomb, trapping the pharaoh and his sacred treasures in silence, while outside the world continued on, unaware of the mysteries sealed within. Once the opening of the mouth ceremony was complete and the coffin securely nested, the procession moved solemnly toward the final resting place, Ramses II's tomb. Picture a line of mourners, priests, and servants winding through the desert, carrying sacred objects, offerings, and the pharaoh's ornate burial treasures. The tomb itself was no ordinary grave. It was a complex architectural masterpiece, carved deep into the rock of the Valley of the Kings. Narrow corridors led to vast chambers decorated with vibrant frescoes depicting the pharaoh's life gods and the perilous journey through the afterlife. You might imagine the scent of burning incense thick in the air, mingling with the dry desert heat. The tomb was both a palace for eternity and a trap designed to keep grave robbers at bay, though we know history didn't always cooperate. A surprising detail: some tomb walls feature texts warning of curses and divine retribution against those who dared disturb the pharaoh's rest. Whether these curses actually deterred thieves is still a matter of scholarly debate. Historians continue to puzzle over how much the average ancient Egyptian knew about these tombs. Were these grand structures hidden secrets or part of a cultural ritual everyone was aware of? As the coffin was lowered into its final place, the priests conducted last rites, sealing the tomb's entrance with massive stone blocks and ensuring the pharaoh's journey into the afterlife would remain undisturbed, or so they hoped. As the heavy stone slabs sealed Ramses II's tomb, the priests performed the final invocations, prayers, and chants intended to protect the pharaoh's soul and ensure his safe passage through the underworld. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the flicker of torchlight fading into darkness. Imagine the tomb's chambers bathed in dim light walls adorned with scenes of gods guiding Ramses past serpents, demons, and trials that awaited him beyond death. These vivid frescoes were more than art. They were spells, stories of rebirth, and warnings all at once. A fascinating detail is that some spells invoked in the tombs have variants found nowhere else, suggesting they were personalized for each king, tailored to his spiritual needs and earthly accomplishments. Historians still debate how much ancient Egyptians outside the priestly class understood about these complex beliefs. Were these secrets for the elite or part of a shared cultural knowledge? Outside, the desert winds slowly covered the entrance, with sand, nature's own seal. Yet despite all efforts, grave robbers and time itself would eventually breach the sanctuary. The final moments of the burial were a mix of solemnity and hope. The hope that Ramses II would achieve immortality and reign eternally in the afterlife. With the tomb sealed, the focus shifted to the rituals performed by the community and family of Ramses II to honor the deceased king. Picture villagers and nobles gathering at temples, offering prayers, food, and incense to the pharaoh's spirit. These ceremonies reinforced the connection between the living and the dead, ensuring the king's memory endured and his soul thrived. The ancient Egyptians believed that the deceased needed ongoing offerings to sustain their K, the life force that continued after death. Without these offerings, the decay could weaken, leaving the soul vulnerable and restless. A quirky note: some families left food and drink offerings at home altars, believing the spirit might visit and enjoy them. This blurred the lines between funerary practice and everyday life. Historians still argue about the degree of public participation in these rituals. Was it a duty only for priests and the elite, or did commoners actively take part in funerary observances? Meanwhile, statues and stelae bearing Ramses' name and image were erected in temples and public spaces, reinforcing his divine status and keeping his legacy alive. Through these living memorials and rites, the king's presence persisted not just in the tomb, but in the hearts and minds of his people. As the years passed, the tomb of Ramses II became a site of pilgrimage and reverence, drawing priests, nobles, and sometimes commoners who sought to connect with the divine king's spirit. Imagine flickering oil lamps illuminating the dark corridors, shadows dancing over the painted walls as priests performed ongoing rites to maintain the king's immortality. These rituals included the Feast of the Valley, a festival where the living crossed the Nile to visit the tombs of the deceased, offering gifts and celebrating the bond between worlds. The air would fill with music, chants, and the scent of flowers, a vivid contrast to the stillness inside the tomb. Interestingly, some tombs show evidence of repairs and restorations, indicating that maintaining these sacred spaces was a continuous effort essential to preserving the king's afterlife journey. Historians still debate the extent to which these maintenance rituals were effective, or merely symbolic acts reflecting changing religious beliefs. Beyond religious purposes, the tomb also served as a powerful political statement, reminding the living of Ramses II's eternal presence and the divine order he upheld. In this way, the tomb was both a resting place and a living monument, bridging past, present, and eternity. Over centuries, Ramses II's tomb faced many threats, from natural erosion to grave robbers. And yet, it stood as a testament to ancient Egyptian ingenuity and faith. Imagine dust settling on the painted walls, inscriptions slowly fading, while secret chambers hid treasures meant only for the pharaoh's eyes. One curious fact: some tombs were deliberately hidden or sealed with false doors and traps to confuse would-be robbers. Despite these efforts, many tombs were looted, leaving historians to piece together fragments of royal burials. Historians still argue about how widespread tomb robbery was during Ramses II's time. Was it rampant or relatively rare? Some suggest that local officials might have been complicit in the thefts. In more recent times, the discovery and excavation of Ramses II's tomb has opened a window into these ancient practices, revealing layers of history and mystery. Archaeologists found not only the mummy, but also artifacts that speak to the rituals, art, and daily life surrounding the pharaoh's death. Even today, the story of Ramses II's burial process continues to captivate imaginations, an epic tale of death devotion and the quest for immortality. As you imagine the centuries passing, the once vibrant colors inside Ramses II's tomb have faded to soft, dusty hues, and the sacred rituals long ceased. Yet the story of this ancient king and his journey through death to immortality still whispers to us across time. In the quiet moments when the desert winds blow gently through the valleys, you can almost hear the echoes of chants and see the flickering torchlight dancing on the walls. The king's spirit, protected by layers of linen, resin, and magic, rests in eternal peace. Historians debate whether the embalming and burial rituals truly ensured immortality or served more to comfort the living by preserving memory and status. And here's a sleepy thought: despite all the care taken, time is the ultimate embalmer, slowly reclaiming all things, but the human desire to be remembered, to live forever through stories and rituals, is perhaps even more enduring. So as you drift toward sleep, Picture the pharaoh lying in state beneath the stars, his journey just beginning, beyond the veil, surrounded by the ancient magic that made him eternal. Now turning to what the ordinary people of ancient Egypt thought about mummification and these grand burial rites. Imagine yourself as a craftsman or farmer in the bustling towns along the Nile. You may have heard tales of kings becoming gods after death wrapped in fine linens and laid to rest in splendid tombs. But what did it really mean to you day to day? Many common folk likely viewed mummification as a sacred tradition essential for the afterlife, but perhaps distant from their own experience. After all, elaborate embalming was expensive and reserved mostly for pharaohs, nobles, and wealthy individuals. Still, most Egyptians believed in an afterlife and the importance of preserving the body for the soul's journey. A quirky detail, some non-royal Egyptians improvised mini-mummifications, wrapping loved ones in linen and including small amulets, showing how widespread and important these beliefs were, even beyond the elite. Historians still debate how deeply these beliefs penetrated the everyday lives of the common people. Was the afterlife a universal hope, or more, an elite fantasy? Despite economic and social differences, the hope for eternal life united Egyptians across classes with funerary customs adapting to suit various means and statuses. So whether a king or laborer, the ancient Egyptians shared a vision of life beyond death, tied closely to the rituals and magic of mummification. For the common people, mummification might have seemed like a mysterious and sacred art practiced by priests far away in grand temples. Imagine a village elder explaining to children how the gods watched over the dead and how preserving the body was crucial for the soul's survival. While the elite enjoyed elaborate ceremonies, most Egyptians had simpler burials sometimes with basic mummification or natural preservation, aided by the dry desert sands. Yet the belief that the afterlife awaited everyone was strong no matter your social status. A fascinating tidbit, some Egyptians made shabti figurines, little servant statues buried with the deceased to do manual work in the afterlife, showing a mix of practical and magical thinking even among everyday folk. Historians still debate whether these beliefs evolved over time from earlier, more animistic traditions, or if the mummification practices themselves spread gradually among social classes. The shared culture of death and rebirth bound communities, helping people cope with mortality by looking beyond to a hopeful eternity. So even if you were miles away from the pharaoh's tomb, you lived in a world alive with rituals, myths, and a profound belief in the magic of mummification. As you wander through the daily life of ancient Egypt, you might overhear conversations about the costs and benefits of mummification. For many families, preserving a loved one's body was a significant investment involving skilled embalmers, special materials, and sacred rituals. Some people turned to priests or embalmers with hopes of securing the best care for their deceased relatives, believing this would guarantee a better afterlife. But for those who couldn't afford full mummification, simpler burials still aimed to honor the dead and ensure their journey beyond. A quirky fact, some embalmers became quite famous, like artists or doctors today, known for their skill in balancing preservation with sacred tradition. Historians debate how much the mummification industry influenced ancient Egypt's economy and society, and whether demand for embalming created new social dynamics. Regardless, these rituals shaped how Egyptians understood life, death, and memory, blending practical care with profound spiritual meaning. So whether you were a wealthy noble or a modest farmer, the desire to honor the dead and secure a peaceful afterlife connected all Egyptians in a shared cultural thread. The ancient Egyptians also held many superstitions and stories about mummies and the afterlife, some of which might have been whispered around fires or in crowded marketplaces. Imagine a storyteller weaving tales of restless spirits, curses on tomb robbers, or miraculous protections granted by sacred spells. People believed that improper mummification, or disturbed graves, could unleash chaos, angering the gods and bringing misfortune. This fear reinforced respect for embalming rituals and tomb sanctity. A quirky note: some stories suggest that the curse of the pharaohs wasn't just modern myth. It may have origins in ancient warnings carved into tombs intended to scare off robbers. Historians still debate whether such beliefs affected behavior or were mainly symbolic. Did everyday Egyptians truly fear curses, or was it an elite tool to protect royal tombs? Regardless, these tales added layers of mystery and magic around mummification, shaping how death was both feared and revered. So in the streets and homes, the magic of embalming was alive, not only in sacred rituals, but also in stories that blurred the line between fact and legend. As your journey through ancient Egypt's mummification rituals comes to an end, think of how this practice shaped an entire civilization's view of life, death, and eternity. From the grand tombs of pharaohs like Ramses II to the humble burials of everyday workers, mummification was a thread weaving together magic, religion, and culture. It wasn't just about preserving a body, it was about preserving identity, memory, and hope. The rituals created a bridge between the earthly and divine, promising that death was not an end, but a transformation. A final quirky thought: even with all their sacred knowledge, ancient Egyptians sometimes made mistakes in mummification, leading to some famously imperfect mummies. It reminds you that behind all this grand magic were humans, fallible and full of curiosity. Historians still explore these mysteries, trying to understand how deeply these beliefs penetrated society and what they meant to different people across time. So, as you close your eyes tonight, imagine yourself wrapped in fine linen, journeying through a timeless desert under a starry sky, part of a story that's been unfolding for thousands of years. We dive into the minds of the everyday people of ancient Egypt. What did they really think about death, mummification, and the afterlife? Picture yourself wandering a bustling village street along the Nile, hearing the chatter of families preparing for a funeral, smelling the incense burned in small shrines. You probably won't survive the process yourself, but you'll get a front-row seat to ancient hopes, fears, and beliefs that shaped an entire civilization. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments so we can feel connected across time and space. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. For ordinary Egyptians, death wasn't a sudden event, but a transition to a complex, magical journey. Life was a continuous thread into the afterlife, where the soul needed care, protection, and a little luck to survive. Unlike the kings and nobles, most common folk didn't have grand tombs or lavish mummification, but their beliefs were no less profound. Daily life was filled with rituals, prayers, and small acts to honor the dead. Family members prepared food offerings and kept the memory alive. The heart, considered the seat of intelligence and emotion, was central to spiritual life, while the brain was often dismissed as useless. This belief shaped their burial practices and funerary spells. Fear mingled with hope. Death was seen as both an end and a beginning full of unknown challenges. People sought protection from evil spirits through magic and charms, trusting gods like Anubis and Osiris to guide their loved ones safely through the afterlife. Historians still argue how widespread these beliefs were. Did the common person understand the complex religious texts? Or did they rely more on oral traditions and community practices? Stick around, as we unfold more layers of ancient Egyptian thoughts on death and immortality. In the heart of every ancient Egyptian family preparing for death was a communal affair, one that brought together generations in a mix of solemn duty and hopeful expectation. You can almost hear the murmur of relatives gathering around discussing the rituals they must perform, balancing respect for tradition with the fear of the unknown. Families were responsible for organizing funerals and maintaining the tombs, ensuring that the deceased had offerings of food, drink, and incense to sustain their spirit. Even if you weren't royalty or a wealthy noble, you'd want your loved ones to remember you properly, because forgetting someone was the worst fate imaginable. Without remembrance, the soul might fade away, lost to oblivion. It's interesting to note that most common people weren't mummified in the elaborate way you've heard about. Many were buried in simple pits or coffins, relying on natural preservation or modest funerary goods. Still, the belief in the afterlife permeated every social layer from peasants to priests. The role of family extended beyond the burial ceremony. Every year during festivals like the Feast of the Valley, families visited tombs, renewed offerings, and recited prayers. These gatherings kept the connection alive, a continuous dialogue between the living and the dead. One quirky detail: some families left written notes or messages to their deceased relatives inside the tomb, like ancient postcards, hoping to reach the other side. You might smile thinking of these personal touches amid grand religious rites. Historians still debate how much everyday Egyptians personally understood about the complex theology surrounding death. Was it mostly the priest's domain, or did families pass down knowledge in simpler, heartfelt ways? Regardless, the act of caring for the dead was a deeply human expression, mixing fear, love, hope, and a stubborn refusal to let go completely. It's a story as old as time itself. Next, we'll explore why the Egyptians treasured the heart as the true seat of the soul, and what that meant for their burial practices. Now imagine the ancient Egyptian mindset when it comes to the heart, their spiritual GPS, so to speak. Unlike us, they didn't put much stock in the brain, which they saw as a useless lump often discarded during mummification. Instead, the heart was everything, the center of thought, emotion, and morality. You might picture a heavy, fleshy organ, but for them, it was the soul's anchor, the ultimate measure of a person's worth in the afterlife. During the famous weighing of the heart ceremony, the deceased's heart was weighed against the feather of Maat, the goddess of truth and justice. If the heart was lighter or equal in weight, you passed. If it was heavy with sin, well, that was bad news. This belief shaped burial rituals dramatically. The heart was carefully preserved and often left inside the body, or sometimes placed in a special container called a heart scarab, inscribed with spells to prevent it from testifying against the deceased. One quirky tidbit: some heart scarabs were actually worn as jewelry by the living, kind of like ancient good luck charms, reminding them to live morally. Imagine wearing your moral compass around your neck every day. Historians still argue how literal people took these beliefs. Was the weighing ceremony seen as an actual event in the afterlife, or more a symbolic representation of moral judgment? And did common Egyptians fully grasp this complex theology, or was it mainly the priestly elite's teaching? This focus on the heart also reveals a lot about Egyptian values. Honesty, integrity, and balance were not just ideals, but necessities for eternal life. Next up, we'll look at how Egyptians balanced their fear of death with hope and optimism, a complicated cocktail of emotions that fueled their rituals. Death in ancient Egypt was never just a straightforward goodbye. It was a complex emotional landscape, mixing dread and optimism in ways that might surprise you. You, as someone wandering through their villages and temples, would hear whispers of fear alongside hopeful chants. It wasn't just the end. It was a doorway to something unknown, potentially terrifying, but also filled with promise. People feared what might go wrong after death, being lost in the chaotic underworld, attacked by demons, or failing the judgment before Osiris. These fears made rituals and spells essential. They weren't superstitions, but survival tools for the soul's journey. At the same time, Egyptians were optimistic. The concept of eternal life, rebirth, and reunion with loved ones was a powerful comfort. Death was a transformation, a chance to live forever in a paradise called the Field of Reeds, a lush version of Egypt, where everything was perfect and peaceful. This duality is reflected in their art and literature, which blend dark warnings with joyful celebrations. Tomb paintings often show both terrifying monsters and serene scenes of feasting and family gatherings. It's a vivid reminder that ancient Egyptians didn't shy away from the scary parts. They faced them head-on, armed with magic and faith. One quirky fact: some Egyptians believed that laughter and joy during life could help ensure a happy afterlife, so funerals might include music and dancing, a bit like ancient raves for the dead. Imagine that vibe. Historians still debate how much this optimism softened real anxieties. Did everyone truly believe in a blissful afterlife, or was it a hope clung to in the face of overwhelming uncertainty coming up? We'll explore how the gods and spirits played into these beliefs, shaping both fear and hope in everyday life. As you stroll through an ancient Egyptian market or temple courtyard, you'd quickly notice how gods and spirits weren't distant figures. They were woven into everyday life, especially when it came to death and the afterlife. Egyptians believed that these divine beings played crucial roles in protecting the soul and ensuring a safe passage to the beyond. Anubis, the jackal-headed god, was the ultimate embalmer and guardian of graves, overseeing mummification and guiding souls through the perilous underworld. Osiris, god of resurrection and judge of the dead, was central to their vision of eternal life. You'd hear prayers to these gods daily, asking for favor, protection, and a successful journey after death. The belief was so strong that statues, amulets, and temple rituals were everywhere, offering spiritual insurance against misfortune. People carried small charms depicting gods to ward off evil spirits or guarantee a smooth journey. A quirky detail: some people believed household spirits could act as guardians too, protecting the family and their homes from harm. This made the boundary between gods and spirits fluid and personal. Historians still argue about the exact influence these deities had on the beliefs of common people versus priests. Did everyone really understand the complex mythologies, or was belief more about tradition and trust? Next, we'll dive into how magic and spells served as everyday tools to protect the living and the dead alike, blending the sacred with the practical. Magic in ancient Egypt wasn't some rare, mysterious force reserved only for priests. It was woven into the very fabric of everyday life, especially when it came to death and the afterlife. You'd find people carrying protective amulets, reciting spells, and using charms to shield themselves and their loved ones from harm, both in life and beyond. The spells weren't just mumbo-jumbo. They were carefully crafted incantations believed to have real power. During mummification, priests recited specific spells to protect the body and spirit, ensuring the soul could navigate the afterlife's dangers. These magical words acted like a divine GPS, guiding the deceased safely through the labyrinthine underworld. One fascinating tidbit: some spells were written on papyri placed inside tombs, while others were inscribed directly onto coffins or even painted on walls. Imagine carrying your own personalized survival manual for the afterlife. Talk about preparation. People also used magic in daily life to keep evil spirits at bay. Crocodile dung, for example, wasn't just sunscreen. It was sometimes part of protective rituals. Weird, yes, but hey, it's the thought that counts. Historians still debate how effective these magical practices were believed to be. Were they symbolic gestures reinforcing faith? Or did Egyptians think of magic as a tangible force? And how much of this knowledge trickled down to the common folk versus staying in priestly circles? Next, we'll explore how social status influenced beliefs about who deserved eternal life, and how this shaped funerary customs. In ancient Egypt, social status wasn't just about wealth or power, it shaped your very chances of eternal life. Imagine standing in a crowded marketplace and overhearing people discuss who truly deserved immortality. For most Egyptians, eternal life was a privilege, not a guarantee. Pharaohs and nobles had elaborate tombs, mummification processes, and access to sacred knowledge, all designed to secure their afterlife. Common folk, by contrast, often had simpler burials and fewer magical protections. This inequality sparked both admiration and quiet envy among the populace. The belief was that a well-prepared burial and proper rituals could tip the scales toward immortality. Those who lived morally, respected the gods, and received the right ceremonies were thought to pass safely into the afterlife. This created social pressure to maintain status and follow religious customs closely. Here's a quirky fact: some commoners tried to imitate elite funerary practices, commissioning modest mummies or using popular spells from the Book of the Dead to boost their chances. It's like ancient insurance for your soul. Historians still debate whether common people genuinely believed in these strict hierarchies, or if they hoped the gods were more forgiving than the texts suggested. Was the promise of eternal life truly limited, or did everyone dream of it regardless of class? Next, we'll look closer at the stark differences between commoners' and elites' burial customs, and what that meant for their beliefs. Now imagine the stark contrast between the glittering tombs of the elite and the humble graves of common folk. The rich had access to elaborate mummification, golden amulets, and decorated coffin symbols of their power and their hope for eternal life. Meanwhile, ordinary people often received simpler burials, sometimes just a basic pit in the sand. But that didn't mean commoners lacked belief in the afterlife. They adapted their rituals to fit their means, using locally made amulets, simpler versions of spells, or relying on community prayers. Funerary practices became a reflection of social status, but also a deeply personal expression of hope. This gap highlights how death rituals reinforced social hierarchies, but also how the desire for immortality was universal. You might find a humble farmer wearing a tiny heart scarab or a small figure of Anubis, little tokens of faith that showed personal devotion regardless of wealth. One quirky note: some commoners reused old burial goods or second-hand amulets, which priests officially discouraged, but likely reflected practical needs and beliefs. Historians still argue about how much social status shaped the afterlife experience. Was the spiritual journey truly unequal? Or did the gods see beyond earthly rank? And how much did the rituals themselves influence belief versus being social performance? Coming up, we'll explore the priests' and embalmers' roles, and whether they were trusted heroes or secret skeptics. Behind the scenes of every ancient Egyptian funeral were the priests and embalmers, figures both revered and perhaps a bit feared. These specialists were the keepers of sacred knowledge, responsible for performing rituals, reciting spells, and preserving bodies through the mysterious art of mummification. You'd see them in their linen robes, moving with practiced precision, applying natron to dry the body, wrapping it carefully, and placing protective amulets between the layers of linen. Their work was essential, not just technical, but deeply spiritual, believed to ensure the deceased's safe passage to the afterlife. Yet you might wonder, did these priests truly believe in the magic, or were they skilled professionals following tradition? Some scholars suggest embalmers might have had practical knowledge mixed with religious faith, while others propose they were the true custodians of Egyptian spirituality, guardians of secrets beyond the average person's understanding. One interesting tidbit: embalmers sometimes left graffiti or personal notes inside tombs, hinting at their own personalities or even doubts. Imagine that, a window into the humanity of these sacred workers. Historians still debate how much power priests held socially and spiritually, and whether they influenced or merely reflected popular beliefs about death and immortality. Next, we'll step into the sacred spaces, the tombs themselves, and what they reveal about ancient Egyptians' hopes and fears. Tombs in ancient Egypt were more than just stone boxes. They were carefully designed, symbolic homes for the dead meant to last eternity. As you approach one, you'd see walls covered with vivid paintings, hieroglyphics, and scenes of daily life, designed to provide comfort and continuity for the deceased soul. These decorations weren't mere decoration. They served as magical tools. Scenes of food, family, and gods were believed to become real in the afterlife, ensuring the soul never went hungry or lonely. The tomb was a spiritual insurance policy, a blueprint for eternal happiness. Interestingly, some tombs were surprisingly modest, while others, like the pharaoh's pyramids, were grand monuments intended to awe both gods and humans. But even the smallest tombs reflected deep care and hope. One quirky detail: some tombs contained false doors, believed to be portals through which the soul could come and go. It's like ancient Egyptian ghost technology. Historians still debate how much these tomb decorations influenced the afterlife experience. Were they magical necessities or symbolic comforts? And did the living really believe their loved ones could interact with these painted scenes? Next, we'll unravel the mysterious rituals performed at the tomb to awaken the dead for their journey. The opening of the mouth ritual was one of the most fascinating and mysterious ceremonies performed in ancient Egypt. Imagine yourself standing in the temple courtyard watching priests carefully awaken the mummy. This rite was believed to restore the deceased's senses, speech, sight, hearing, and taste, essential for navigating the afterlife. Using special tools, priests touched the mummy's mouth, eyes, and ears while reciting sacred spells. It was as if they were jump-starting the body, ensuring the soul could fully experience its new existence. The ritual also symbolized rebirth, transforming the deceased into a living spirit. One quirky fact: the tools used were often shaped like animals' heads of falcons, jackals, or crocodiles, each symbolizing specific powers or protections. The symbolism was so layered, it would make your head spin. Historians still debate whether this ceremony was purely symbolic or believed to have actual supernatural power. Did people think the dead really woke up? Or was it a deeply poetic tradition that comforted the living? Next, we'll explore how funerary texts, like the Book of the Dead, guided souls through their journey, acting as spiritual GPS for the afterlife. The Book of the Dead wasn't just a book. It was a personalized survival guide for the afterlife, full of spells, prayers, and instructions to help the deceased overcome dangers and reach paradise. Imagine carrying a manual so crucial that it was carefully written on papyrus scrolls and placed in your tomb alongside your body. Each copy was unique, tailored to the individual, and included everything from how to ward off demons to the secret names of gods you might need to call upon. It was like ancient Egyptian Google Maps for the soul, navigating the twists and turns of the underworld. Interestingly, the spells weren't all serious business. Some included clever riddles or metaphors showing Egyptians had a sense of humor even in death. One popular spell instructed the soul to speak the words of power, so no obstacle could block the path. Historians still argue about how widely accessible the Book of the Dead was. Was it mainly for the elite, or could common people also own copies? And how much did the text influence popular ideas about the afterlife versus reflecting priestly doctrine? Coming up, we'll dive into the role of funerary art and symbolism in shaping beliefs about death and resurrection. Funerary art in ancient Egypt was like a visual language telling stories not just for the living, but for the soul's journey ahead. Picture yourself walking past a tomb adorned with colorful murals. Each symbol, each figure had a purpose, serving as a map and a prayer. These artworks portrayed God's protective symbols and scenes of daily life, reinforcing the idea that the afterlife would be a continuation of the earthly experience, but perfected. You might see images of the deceased enjoying a bountiful harvest, feasting with family, or sailing down the Nile. Idealized visions meant to reassure both the soul and the mourners. One quirky aspect, some paintings included tiny hieroglyphs, called magical spells, that were believed to come alive, protecting the tomb from evil or helping the dead communicate with the living. Historians still debate whether these images were more symbolic or believed to have real magical effects. Did ancient Egyptians truly expect these painted scenes to manifest in the afterlife, or were they comforting metaphors? Next, we'll look at the role of animals and their symbolism in funerary beliefs and practices. Animals held a sacred place in ancient Egyptian beliefs about death and the afterlife, acting as powerful symbols and spiritual guides. Imagine walking through a temple courtyard where statues and amulets shaped like cats, falcons, and jackals remind you that these creatures were more than just pets. They were bridges between worlds. The jackal, for instance, was linked to Anubis, the god of mummification guiding souls safely through the underworld. Cats represented protection and grace, often associated with the goddess Bastet. Falcons symbolized the divine, linked to Horus and the pharaoh's power. Some animals were even mummified themselves, a practice that might strike you as both fascinating and a little strange. Animal cemeteries have been found where millions of mummified creatures were buried as offerings or spiritual companions. One quirky detail, the ancient Egyptians sometimes believed the soul of a deceased person could inhabit an animal statue or amulet, allowing a form of spiritual protection or communication. Historians still debate whether animal mummification was primarily religious, economic, or a mix of both. And how widespread was the belief that animals had such direct spiritual roles? Next, we'll explore the funerary feasts and mourning rituals that surrounded death, adding human warmth to the sacred process. Funerary feasts and mourning rituals in ancient Egypt were lively, deeply emotional events that brought communities together to honor the dead and support their journey beyond. Imagine standing in a courtyard filled with family and friends, sharing food, music, and stories, a moment where grief mixed with hope and celebration. These gatherings included offerings of bread, beer, and favorite foods to nourish the soul in the afterlife. Professional mourners might wail dramatically, their voices echoing ancient beliefs that loud grief could help guide the deceased to the gods. Interestingly, some rituals involved symbolic acts, like tearing clothes or shaving heads to express sorrow, while others included dancing or chanting spells to protect the spirit. The line between solemnity and festivity was fluid. Death was both an ending and a beginning. One quirky note: at times, funerary feasts featured performances that reenacted scenes from the deceased's life or myths about death and rebirth, blurring reality and ritual. Historians still argue about how much these practices evolved over time and varied by region. Were they primarily spiritual necessities or social customs that reinforced community bonds? Now let's slow things down with a gentle wind down, softening the pace, as we prepare to journey deeper into the mysteries of ancient Egyptian death. The desert sands, cool and silent, cradle the tombs as you imagine the final moments of this ancient ritual journey. The bustle of feasts and prayers fades like a soft whisper, replaced by the gentle rustle of linen wrappings and the faint scent of myrrh and frankincense lingering in the air. You feel the weight of time, the patience of millennia, as the soul embarks on its endless voyage. The Egyptians believed that death was not an end, but a transformation, a passage through shadowed realms toward renewal and eternity. As night deepens, the images of gods and spells carved in stone glow softly in your mind, guiding you with their silent wisdom. The quiet hum of the afterlife's promise invites you to breathe deeply, surrender to the gentle rhythm of ancient stories, and feel the comforting embrace of a world where life and death are intertwined in an eternal dance. Let your thoughts drift like a river under the stars, knowing that the magic of mummification, the rituals, and the hopes of a civilization long gone still echo through time, carrying you softly toward rest. As dawn breaks, the focus shifts to the intricate craftsmanship behind the funerary goods that accompany the dead. Imagine artisans carving delicate statues, weaving fine linens, and crafting jewelry designed not just for beauty, but for spiritual power. These objects were believed to aid the soul's journey, each imbued with symbolism and intent. You might marvel at the heart scarab, a centerpiece of many burials designed to protect the heart during the final judgment. Made from precious stones or carved from faience, these scarabs were inscribed with spells to silence the heart's testimony or prove the deceased's purity. What's fascinating is that some burial goods included replicas or miniatures, tiny boats, weapons, and tools symbolizing the essentials the soul might need in the afterlife. It's like packing a spiritual survival kit, carefully prepared by loved ones or artisans. Historians still debate how much these objects reflected genuine beliefs versus social status, or the desire to display wealth, and whether the average Egyptian truly understood their symbolism or simply trusted tradition. Next, we'll explore the journey of the soul through the underworld and the challenges. Picture yourself following the soul's journey through the underworld, a dark and mysterious realm known as Duat. This was no straightforward path. It was a perilous voyage filled with guardians' gates and tests that the deceased had to overcome to reach eternal life. The soul faced demons and monsters, many with grotesque forms demanding answers to riddles or proof of worthiness. Some gates required the correct spell or magical phrase from the Book of the Dead to pass. Failure meant destruction or eternal wandering, a fate worse than death. A quirky tidbit: ancient Egyptians imagined the underworld as a labyrinthine river journey, complete with boats and oars, reflecting their reliance on the Nile. It's as if the afterlife was just another Nile adventure, but with higher stakes. Historians still argue whether these stories were meant literally or symbolically, and to what extent they reflected ancient fears versus spiritual aspirations. Was the underworld a scary place, or a metaphor for inner transformation? Next, we'll look at the crucial final judgment before the soul's fate is sealed. Now imagine standing before the scales of Mayat, the ultimate test of the soul's purity and worthiness. The heart, believed to be the seat of conscience, was weighed against the feather of truth light, delicate and flawless. If the heart balanced perfectly, the soul was deemed pure and granted passage to the eternal afterlife. Failing this test meant the heart was devoured by Ammit, a fearsome creature part, lion, hippo, and crocodile. A grim fate that erased the soul's existence entirely. You can almost feel the tension of that moment where all of a person's deeds and intentions were laid bare. One fascinating aspect is that some people carried spells or amulets specifically designed to influence this judgment, reflecting both hope and a touch of ancient cheating. Historians still debate the philosophical implications. Was this an early concept of moral accountability, or simply a myth to reinforce social order? And did everyone truly believe in this judgment, or was it more a priestly construct? Coming up, we'll explore what ancient Egyptians imagined eternal life looked like and how it shaped their daily lives. Eternal life in the eyes of ancient Egyptians was a continuation of the best parts of earthly existence: family, abundance, and peace, free from pain and suffering. Imagine a world where you could forever enjoy a lush garden by the Nile, feast on delicious food, and be reunited with loved ones who passed before you. They envisioned the afterlife as a paradise called the Field of Reeds, an idealized version of their homeland, with endless crops, gentle animals, and flowing water. It wasn't a place of clouds and harps, but a vibrant continuation of daily life, perfected and eternal. One quirky detail, some tombs included instructions on how to call on your family or servants to join you in the afterlife, ensuring you'd never be lonely. It's like ancient Egypt's version of Friends Forever. Historians still argue about how much this vision shaped the way Egyptians lived. Did the promise of eternal life inspire generosity, piety, or fear? Or was it a comforting story to face the mystery of death? As our journey comes to an end, remember the mummy's rituals and stories you've met tonight. They are threads in the vast tapestry of human hope and mystery. Rest easy knowing that even thousands of years later, their magic whispers to us across the sands of time.